Welcome to PianoInspires podcast, celebrating pianists, teachers, and innovators as they share their inspiring stories about the transformative power of music.
Hello, I'm Craig Sale, Senior Editor for Piano Magazine and Director of Online Courses for the Francis Clark Center. And it is a real pleasure today to get to speak with the amazing Sara Davis Buechner. She is one of the most original concert pianists of our time. Japan's In Tune magazine summed it up very appropriately that Buechner has no superior. And here at our National Conference on Keyboard Pedagogy, she performed last night, and I can say all of those tributes are absolutely true. It was an amazing evening. In her 20s, she earned a bouquet of top prizes at the world's premier international piano competitions, including a bronze medal at the 1986 Tchaikovsky competition in Moscow and the gold medal at the 1984 Gina Bachauer International Piano Competition. She has performed in every state and province of North America as a recitalist, chamber musician, soloist, with top orchestras like the New York Philharmonic, the San Francisco Symphony, and the Philadelphia Orchestra. She's toured throughout Latin and South America and Europe, and enjoys a special following in Asia. It's interesting, too, that she's also commissioned and premiered numerous important contemporary scores by a variety of composers. And she has also released numerous acclaimed recordings of rare piano music by composers such as Rudolf Frimmel, Joseph Lamb, Joaquin Turina, Miklos Rozsa, and Ferruccio Busoni. Most recently, she joined the faculty of Temple University's Boyer College of Music and Dance, after previously teaching at the Manhattan School of Music, New York University, and the University of British Columbia. As a proud transgender woman, Ms. Buechner also appears as a speaker and performer at important LGBTQ events and has contributed interviews and articles about her experience to numerous media outlets worldwide. She is a dual American-Canadian citizen who now makes her home in Philadelphia. And as I said before, it is wonderful to welcome you here.
Thank you, Craig. It's so nice to be here.
It's just a real pleasure, especially in the afterglow of last night's performance, which was astounding.
Thank you. Thank you. So sweet. So
let's go back to the beginning, to your those formative years as a child.
Yes.
And I'd like you to share your musical beginnings, and I think of particular importance to people is how important music was for you in your life as a child.
It was the defining element of my childhood. In fact, it was my mother who noticed that at 4:30 every afternoon I would sort of walk like a zombie to the living room radio because they used a tag for the classical program of Mozart's overture to the Marriage of Figaro. And this was something that just sort of drew me. It was like magic, you know. I remember, even now I think about that music, you know, sort of my heart goes kind of pit-a-pat. And she started to put that together, that's why, you know. So she started my older brother, on piano lessons, and she's a marvelous teacher, a Hungarian composer. She was just 18 years old at the time, named Veronica Wolf, and she came to the neighborhood to give piano lessons to the kids. And she refused to teach me because I was 3 or maybe 4 years old, and she said, I'm too young, can't concentrate, this kind of stuff. But I was going to the piano and punking out tunes and stuff. So at some point, my mother, who was kind of a junior tiger mom, just sort of pushed her. And so Miss Wolf picked me up on my hands, put me in her lap. I didn't remember this. She told me many, many years later that I could play all my brother's pieces without instruction. And then she turned to the back of Leila Fletcher, Book 1, and I could play all that stuff too. So I could read the music without instruction, and she was pretty impressed about that. And then, of all things, she asked me, and I shouldn't, but I'll imitate her voice because she had a wonderful Budapest accent. It's just, what you want to be when you're grown up, like that. And I told her I want to be a piano player and a pig farmer. These were my two goals in life. And I still tell people, well, at least half of my dreams have come true. I still have time to work on the other. So I was very influenced by Miss Wolf because she was always smiling, she was always joyous, and she loved music, she loved children, she loved being a teacher of children. I had no idea she was a composer of electronic music, and she studied with Gunther Schuller and things like this, and she's now a dean of the Jerusalem Academy of Music and Dance in Israel. But she was a young student at the time, and she was very interested in how we teach children and how do we inspire them. And to me, it was like Christmas Day every day she came. She just had such a big grin, and she loved what she did, and she made music fun always. That was like the highlight of the week. So I studied with her for a couple of years. Then she took me to her teacher in Baltimore, who was a marvelous Filipino pianist named Reynaldo Reyes. And Reynaldo was a graduate of the Paris Conservatory. He'd studied with Marguerite Long and Jacques Février and Joan Doyen. And Reynaldo sort of took me as his prize pupil. I mean, for about 10 years, he taught me absolutely free of charge. We were pretty poor. He just donated those. And the lessons were long, 2, 3, 4 hours sometimes, especially when doing competitions. And he took me from, literally the earliest teaching pieces to Islam. I was playing by the time I left him at the age of 16 to go to Juilliard. He also taught me solfege. And he taught me very, very much by example, because he would sight read incredibly. He used to be one of the accompanists for the Metropolitan Opera auditions in Washington, and we would go and watch those things. And he would walk on stage and play with these singers, and I thought, that's nice. Years later, I realized, the singers would come to him right before going on stage, give him a pile of arias and, and lieder to play, and say, okay, this one I need up a half step, and this one down a third, and then, blah, blah, blah. And he either knew them or he didn't know them, and he'd walk on stage and play it like a master. It was incredible, his sight reading and transposition and basic fundamental skills. I think of that to this day in my own teaching, how much it's important to teach those skills. I also lament that so many pianists come of age without having those skills. And I had to teach myself most of those skills as I got older. Anyway, as I mentioned, Reynaldo was a wonderful, wonderful teacher, and also sort of by example, because he spoke 8 or 9 languages. And we used to play a game, my brother and I, he was still taking lessons too. We would go into his studio and we'd say, what language is he going to say today? Because the phone would ring and he'd pick it up, and you never knew. He could answer in English, he could answer in Tagalog, it might be Greek. He spoke Greek, he knew Italian, Spanish, he knew all those languages from coaching singers and playing for singers, of course, etc. But he just had this great fluency for language. And as well, he had this boundless appetite for all the cultures and patterns of the world. And I used to say to people that growing up in the suburbs of Northwest Baltimore was black and white. It was like Leave It to Beaver, It was just a huge contrast to Saturday. You go to Mr. Reyes' studio, it was Technicolor. It was like walking into Disneyland or the world or something like that. So all of that just made me very passionate about music. In my teen years, Mr. Reyes also told my parents that I should go to the concerts of the Baltimore Symphony, and we had subscription tickets every Wednesday night. And this was also something that just burst my ears and eyes open, because, to hear so much core repertoire for the first time performed live was so exciting, I mean, there's an element to the live performance, obviously, which doesn't exist in just watching things on YouTube or even watching movies, and there are works that still, to this day, when I think about the Debussy Nocturnes, Franck's Symphony in D minor, the first time I heard Beethoven's Fifth Concerto was under the hands of Gina Bachauer. So many of those concerts is Beethoven's Eighth Symphony, and I can hear the music and I can see the whole scene in the unair-conditioned Lyric Theater in early summer, and everyone's sweating and fans are going, so that music, just Borodin's Second Symphony, all those things. So with that background, I skipped a year of high school, and I went to Juilliard when I was 16 to study with Reynaldo's teacher, who was a brilliant Polish virtuoso named Mieczysław Muntz. He was a Busoni pupil. And I probably had about a year of lessons with Mr. Muntz, actually, before I went to Juilliard, because he died just as I entered the school. And I ended up in the studio of another teacher who was a very poor teacher. He was an old man who had had a very distinguished career, done some very, very important things. but he was old and tired and burnt out, and worst of all, he was an alcoholic. So the lessons were desultory. He slept, he fell down a few times, things like this, which at that time in the mid-1970s, you wouldn't dream of going to the dean or the president of the school and making a complaint. Are you kidding? You just, I remember once calling the man's wife and with another student, we pretty much carried him to Grand Central Station to get him on the train to get him home. So my first few months at Juilliard were sort of like terrifying. I was, New York is huge. I was overwhelmed. I looked up and down the halls of the school. The 4th and 5th floors were practice rooms full of pianists who were incredible. Literally the first day in that place, I went into room 605 to practice, and I thought I was the biggest thing ever to hit New York. Here I played the Tchaikovsky Concerto and the Liszt B minor Sonata and Islamé, and I was halfway through Islamé, and I was getting a little tired, want to work on something. I stopped, and in the practice room next door was a pianist playing it twice as fast as I was playing it. It was kind of like the classic "Welcome to the big leagues, kid."
Right.
What's so special about you? And I was terrified because here I was, I was missing out on, obviously, this was the level I had to reach, this all around me was the level I was expected to play at, to be a professional. And I didn't know what to do. And I was so reliant on my teacher at that point, and, the teachers to that point in my life were teachers who told you what to do. They fingered things for you. They told you, do this, 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 this. So I was faced with this kind of dilemma. I remember calling my parents and saying, I don't know, maybe I should just come home and study with Mr. Reyes some more or whatever. And wisely they said, no, stick it out. See what you can figure out there. And I thought, okay, that makes sense. I'm in New York City. There's got to be something here to learn, right? And I went to the Juilliard Library, and I don't know, there were 20, 30, 40 rows of piano music on those shelves. And I thought, this is what I don't know, and that's what I have to know. So I began to take volumes out in alphabetical order every day. I'd take a couple of things into the practice room and start my day by sight reading. I was a poor sight reader. I knew Mr. Reyes was a great sight reader. So I figured, well, I have to learn how to sight read because he can just play things and I have to train myself to do that. And in truth, I don't think that there is a teacher who can teach that to you, frankly. It's very much like language. You learn to speak French by reading a lot of French and practicing speaking French and going to France and doing it. So I began with Isidore Atron, his Rhapsody No. 2, and by golly, in a few weeks and months or whatever, suddenly I was playing a lot of chamber music with friends because they'd say, "Oh, Buechner's a good sight reader, go play," and they would put stuff up, and I could sight read it, and then it got better and better and better. And about 2 years later, I finished the piano music. I didn't read every volume.
Okay.
I skipped some composers who I didn't like very much, and surprisingly, they would be like Prokofiev and Rachmaninoff, because I heard people playing that music everywhere, and I thought, well, I don't think there's anything I can add to that, and it wasn't the music that really I loved the most. I took very, very quickly to all things Mozart, Haydn, Hummel of all people, and Dussek and George Frederick Pinto. These names come, and then Spanish composers. I loved so much Spanish music that's not played and not known. And the thing is, because I was sort of going alphabetically, I started to find composers who you just didn't hear in concert. And, not minor figures either. I mean, like Fauré. I never heard anybody play the nocturnes and barcarolles of Fauré, or Joaquin Turina's marvelous piano music, things like this. Anyway, in the process, yes, I became a very good sight reader, and I also came to this realization that each composer is basically their own world. They have their own language. And the more, let's say, of the Brahms short pieces or his exercises that I got to know, well, then playing through the larger variations and sonatas wasn't nearly as hard. It was like, oh, I know that language. I recognize those chords. I know how he writes for the left hand, and the figurations in the right, and so forth. And it was just sort of like, it was like Mr. Reyes's collection of languages. Like the more of these that I know, the more I can communicate with people, and the more things that my world will be brighter and more colorful and so forth. So that sort of I became sort of my own teacher in many ways. And in terms of pedagogy and technique, I was terrified if my technique wasn't going to be good enough. And there too, I mean, the library had everything you needed. It was Giesecke's book and Levine's book and Courteau's exercises, and most startlingly to me, the 7-volume Master School of Modern Piano Playing and Virtuosity by Alberto Jonas, which is like the Bible I use in my own teaching now. I refer people to this all the time. And when I was working briefly for Dover Publications, I was able to get them to reprint the first 2 volumes. But here was a master pedagogue who had laid out in 7 volumes most of the basic tenets of piano playing, including pedaling, with input from Gabrilovich and Busoni and Courteau and Dognani and Stoyovsky and Levine and so forth. This stuff is recorded. I mean, we have the records of these great pianists of the past, and they left things because they wanted us to know about it. You know? And I started to become astonished by the lack of inquisitiveness by so many of my colleagues and even teachers in the programming, in the teaching, in the knowledge of the fullness of the keyboard repertoire, which is vast and endless, of course. I feel so lucky to be a pianist as opposed to many other instruments. If you think about the core concerto repertoire, let's say for cello, which I accompanied cellists a lot, and I did many skillful renditions of the Dvorak concerto, the Schumann concerto, the Elgar concerto, et cetera, et cetera. They probably have a core repertoire of some 20 concertos maximum to master, to be a great cellist and know the cello concerto repertoire. In terms of piano concertos, I've played 120 different ones, and number 121 is coming up, the Gerald Finzi Eclogue, which is a beautiful, beautiful piece. It's boundless. And by the way, there's some standards I've never played. I've never played the Rachmaninoff third or the fourth. Let's see. I've never played Prokofiev 2, or 4 or 5 for that matter. So I'll keep hacking at it. Maybe I'll get there. It's boundless. It's endless. To swim in that ocean of music is an incredible privilege. What can I say? This was the fundamental teaching I received. Later, I studied for 4 years with Rudolf Verkushny at Juilliard in the higher degree programs, and he was a very, very great musician and a very, very great teacher. He also taught by example. He would play in the lessons a lot, and I would have the feeling I was sitting next to Rembrandt showing you, do you want to get this sepia tone, do it like this. And he was quite modest about it. I was very surprised when after he passed away, that his daughter told me that he would come home and say that he felt a little insecure as a teacher. He would go into Juilliard, and he had a few good students like Efim Bronfman, who had his lesson before mine, and he was kind of amazed by this. He said they have technique, they can play all over what can I teach them? He would actually say that, but oh my goodness, what he could teach. One of my first lessons, I played the Waldstein Sonata at breakneck speed. I was very proud of that. And when I finished, he said, it sounds a little like Czerny. He said, even a scale can be expressive. And he walked to the piano, played this scale with the tone was like butterscotch and bourbon. It was so rich and beautiful. I nearly cried. It was the most beautiful C major scale I ever heard. I ran to the practice room and I was just copying those motions. I don't have to do this. You would learn so much to sit in the room with a master like that who would tell you this is important, this is important, this is important. And then when I left Juilliard, I had won some competitions and I had management and I was playing concerts. But when I saw that Byron Janis was teaching at Manhattan School of Music, I re-enrolled. So I was still pretty active in playing concerts, but I enrolled at Manhattan and I got my doctorate there, working with him for 2 or 3 years because he was my mother's favorite pianist. I had idolized him. I'd heard him as a kid in the heyday of his career when he was electrifying. He was just a magnificent artist. And he too, at this time, of course, his career had been sidetracked by psoriatic arthritis, which affected his whole body. And, he showed me, for example, in his fingers where his bones had actually fused together. Can you imagine? It was just horrifying to see. But still, he would sit at the piano and produce these tones, these outrageous, incredible tonality and combinations. And he explained how he and Horowitz would break the chords, and you break it this way or this way, and then this voice will come out, like like a master watch craftsman or something like that. He's just an amazing musician. And some decades later, I was in China in 2013. I was invited to be one of 10 guest artists at a pretty important international piano festival. And one of the musicians there was Paul Badura-Skota, who I'd always venerated. I loved his Mozart recordings and really admired him greatly. And I have to be so embarrassed that when I saw his name there, I was so startled. I hadn't even thought that the man might even still be alive. He was in his 80s, you know. And when I met him, I apologized to him that I always wanted to hear you play live. And he said, well, it's not your fault. He says, I never toured America. He said he'd had one quick tour when he was young. The manager didn't like him. And he went back to Europe, and he made his career pretty much in Europe and Japan and Asia and so forth. But I was 56 at the time, and I wrote him a note afterwards. I said, I'm preparing all the Mozart sonatas to play in Japan, and I would just love to be able to play for you. And I said, I'm sure I'll be your oldest student ever. And he wrote back, and he said, oh, please. He said, of course you wouldn't be my oldest student, and, et cetera. And I said to friends at that time, I said, any gentleman who can lie so wonderfully has got to be an extraordinary human being. And I went to Vienna a couple of times also when he came to the United States for a visit once. Spent about a week, several weeks with him and going through those sonatas. And it was astounding. Again, a master craftsman with a completely different set of watches. I mean, it is amazing how many different ways you can play the piano. Also, I mean, not only you learn to play the piano, and there's all the repertoire and the technical approaches and so forth, but he's a man who used his hands in a completely different way than any other teachers and so forth. And it was really funny to copy that and sort of feel like I was 20 again, and it was really funny. But I recall many things about this extraordinary musician, of course. But one of the most poignant being, after a long day of, I'm not so eager to call them lessons as much as sharing. They were delightful. I mean, there was one time I was playing a Mozart sonata and I added an embellishment somewhere because we were discussing all of these things, embellishments, improvisations, cadenzas, all these kind of things, and I did an embellishment. He quickly jumped up and he said, No, Zara, you must not embellish there. However, if you want to, here's a good one. It was so wonderful. In a way, I realized it was great that I had played for him in my 50s, because in my 20s, he would have said something and I would have felt honored about, I have to do that. Students have that kind of feeling. In this case, it was sort of, he was showing me, yes, there are rules, but if you're good enough, go ahead and break them, and that was a marvelous thing. I don't think he would have shown that to a younger student. It was quite wonderful. But after that, we had dinner with him, many occasions with him and his partner, and he asked me in the middle of dinner, just out of the blue, he was intrigued that I was American. I don't think he taught many American students. And then I had made this voyage to Europe to work with him. And he asked me, he said, why do you Americans not venerate your own saints? It's a curious question. I didn't understand what he meant. And he made this gesture. The whole apartment, again, it wasn't an apartment, it was a museum full of pianos and historic instruments and a library, the magnitude you couldn't imagine, the studiousness, the devotion of this man just blew me away. And there in the kitchen were two shelves, enormous shelves in every wall, full of books. But he gestured to the bottom two shelves, very long shelves, full of the complete writings and speeches of both Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. And I was just kind of blown away. Here was this European gentleman who knew far more about American history and society than most Americans do.
Wow.
That pretty much staggered me. But it led to a fervent discussion of his life, the times in which he had grown up in the immediate after effect of World War II, right, and when Vienna was divided into 4 zones, and he'd grown up in the Russian zone, and there were horrifying stories of that. My teacher, Ronaldo Reyes, had terrible stories of the Japanese occupation of the Philippines. Fukushny had escaped with his life with his friend Bohuslav Martinu to France, and then Portugal, and then the United States, kind of like the movie Casablanca. And I had a poignant conversation with the Vietnamese pianist Dong Tai Son about his growing up in Vietnam during the war years, and saving his piano from burning of Agent Orange. I mean, horrifying stories. Miss Wolf as well had escaped from Hungary during the uprising of 1956. The study of music, the devotion to music, had been a kind of a savior to all of these people's lives. And I feel myself, in my own experience of life, that music and life are inextricably tied. You cannot separate the study of one from the study of the other. And the music leads us to some sort of higher understanding that none of us can truly define. So isn't it wonderful that, unlike painting, where you can say that's a picture X, or a play where you can say that's about this, or a novel and you say the words say this, music is evanescent, and what it means to every single person in the audience is a little bit different, and the experience of it takes us to a sharing of emotion that cannot be described any other way. It is, as Busoni said, the most lasting and yet unlasting of art forms. It's an extraordinary thing to devote your life to.
And for you personally, music has been a savior, a refuge throughout your life.
It has been, yes, always, yes. As a teenager, in those symphony concerts that I heard, I could look down on that stage, and we didn't have the verbiage for it at that time, but it really was my "it gets better" kind of reminder, because the music would take me out of this world where I didn't really quite fit in. I knew that I was transgender. As a small child, I knew that I was female, but people kept telling me otherwise, and I look in the mirror, and the mirror told me otherwise, and I couldn't reconcile that. And what little I was able to read about it as I got into my teen years all just said, I'm a very, very sick person who needs psychiatric treatment. And I got psychiatric treatment when I was in my late teens. I nearly died of a bleeding ulcer in my second year of Juilliard. And I was taken to a Freudian psychiatrist. And the nonsense that they just spilled on you, I was very lucky I wasn't given electroshock or a lobotomy,
Right.
And I had one transgender friend who was literally taken against her will to a hospital. Even, I dare say it, my own father thought about doing this at the time I transitioned. In my mid-30s, he called friends and said, isn't there some way we can just take him to a hospital? This was the response to that I knew. So my best approach to that in my own life was to stuff that deep into the closet and try to deal as the concert pianist David Buechner. And as long as the intensity of building the career was focused on learning repertoire and entering competitions and, sort of establishing yourself, there was enough distraction and hard work to be done. But it was after that period was over, in my early 30s, I began to think, who am I, and am I happy? I had a failed marriage. I had one broken relationship after another. I was tormented. I was deeply unhappy. It got worse. There was bouts with drugs and alcohol and many other things, suicide attempts, terrible, terrible things going on in my life, and therapists telling me insane things that didn't add up. And then this revelation when I was 36, and the ability to find out better things on the internet and through some better books that began to come out. I started to understand who I was and why I was. And on that day, on November 29th, 1996, I was walking across Central Park and laid down on a rock, and I tell people, I had a conversation with God, and it was all clear. And it was just like all this Gordian knot just untied for me. I knew exactly who I was. I knew what my name was, and I knew everything that I would do to make that happen. And then I had the pleasure of watching the movie around me turn insane. What had been calm and orderly, and everybody knew David Buechner and David, blah, blah, blah. Suddenly, people disappeared from my life. Conductors wouldn't return calls, and chamber music partners wouldn't play with me. And, family and friends just vanished. And suddenly, I had my music.
Yeah.
I didn't have my music career, but I had
Right.
my music. I thought of something. I did have one wonderful therapist at that time who mentioned to me that everything in life is an opportunity. I'm not sure I totally agree with that statement, but it's something to hold on to. In any case, looking for employment, a friend recommended me to a children's school in Westchester, and I went up there to see about it. And the woman who ran the school, her eyes went kind of big when I walked in, and she said, "You're Sara Davis Buechner." I said, "Well, yeah, I am." And she said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "I understand you have an opening for a piano teacher." And she said, "You want to teach here?" And I said, "Frankly, I have to teach somewhere. I need the money." You know. And she hired me on the spot and doubled the rate of pay, which was really, really sweet of her. And suddenly I was teaching 2 days a week at this school, and I was teaching 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds, like how to play the piano. And I thought, when I was 20, 21, and I did a little bit of that, I hated every single moment of it. I thought I needed to be playing Carnegie Hall. I needed to be making my debut with the Berlin Philharmonic. What was I doing teaching? These little moppets, whatever. And I thought, this is the reality. I'm 40, 41 years old. I'm Sara Davis Buechner. I'm teaching young children at this school, and damn it, I'm going to be a good teacher. I thought, this is my opportunity to learn how to teach children, and I did. And I didn't read books to learn how to teach children. I just taught them. They came in, whether they were talented or not, and mostly they weren't. But I thought, my job here is to spend 30 minutes with these young people, and when they come in, I'm going to make sure that I'm just like Miss Wolf made me feel, that I'm really happy to see them, and I'm going to take them on some fun journey here, and when they leave, they're going to have a smile on their face, and music is going to be something that they associate with fun and laughter and love.
Yep.
And 3 years later, when I left that school, because I did get a position at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, my proudest achievement as a teacher there was with a young girl who was about 8 years old named Katie Welch. And Katie was the kind of kid. She came in for the lesson and scratching herself all over. I said, "Katie, what's going on here?" She said, "I got in a fight with a boy." I said, "Did you win the fight?" She said, "Yes, I did." High five. And I said, "But why are you scratching? Did he hurt you or something?" She said, No, I fell in some poison ivy after the fight. I said, "Well, that's nice of you to share that with everybody here at the keyboard." And
Right.
So I had to take her. This is the sort of thing doesn't happen at Juilliard. You don't have to wash your students' hands because they're full of poison ivy. Anyway, Katie Welch's first piano lesson, she came in with a big frown on her face. I said, "Are you in a bad mood?" And she said, "Yeah." I said, "Why are you in a bad mood?" "I hate the piano." And I said, "So do I. I hate the piano a lot. Let's beat it up." And I said, "Sit here with me." And we just bam, 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 hit the keys of the piano for a while until she got tired. I just let her do that until she... I said, "Okay, now you tired of hitting the piano?" And she said, "Yeah." I said, "Let me show you how the piano can maybe be your friend." And I started to play a beautiful Chopin Nocturne, Little Stars. Oh, that's really nice, Anyway, 3 years later, she came in for her last lesson. She didn't know it was her last lesson. And when it was done, I said, "Katie, I have to tell you something. I'm won't be your piano teacher next year. I'm moving to the city of Vancouver. I'm joining a college faculty there." And she said, "Where's Vancouver?" And I drew a little map for her and I showed her. And she burst out crying. I said, "Why are you crying? What's the upset?" She said, "I love the piano.
Oh.
It's the best teaching job I ever did in my life." Because it's interesting. I mean, I love my college students, of course, and however, they're at an age where they have specific goals in mind. They have to pass the
Right.
jury. They're entering a competition. They're auditioning for a job. They need this skill or that skill. It's very goal oriented. With young children, I'm very aware that I don't know what their goals are. They don't know what their goals are.
Yeah.
They're unformed. And the main thing is that you want to prepare them that if they do decide to be a teacher of music, to be a choir director, to be an accompanist, to be a teacher of solfege, to be a jazz band leader, whatever, that, they have a very, very positive feeling about
Right.
it.
Right.
So to that end, it quickly occurred to me, I'm sort of getting off the topic here, I guess, but it quickly occurred to me that one reason that it's hard to teach a 5-year-old to play the piano is every orgone and zygote and amoeba in their body is splitting and growing and telling them, move, 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 move. So around the midpoint of the 30-minute lesson, I'd say, boy, am I tired, and I'm stretching. It's, we need some fresh air. I think you better chase the monster. I make a monster face and chase him off the piano bench and run around the room, just run around the room, under the piano. Boy, help me get fit,
Yeah.
Because little kids can really move until they were breathing hard and say, okay, you tired? Yeah, okay, let's sit and rest. Maybe we can do some more piano now. Okay. You just have to climb into their bodies and understand the psychology of children. It's the most crucial thing. You don't learn that in a textbook. You know, it's no different than learning the language of Brahms, learning French language, learning the language of life. In any case, so my difficult years were occasioned by the transition, which was unusual at the time, to say the least, and. Fortunately, when I did move to Canada, Canada was well ahead of the United States in terms of civil rights, social equality, how they look at all those things. And, I was very, very happy living in Canada. And those years were fine. And when the opening came at Temple, though, I was eager to return to the States. My mom had just died, and I missed her, and my dad is elderly now. And my brother lives in Washington. He's a scientist at the National Science Foundation. And all my friends and relatives are basically around here. So I was really, really delighted to come to Temple. And it's a wonderful school. We have a wonderful faculty and terrific students, and in the beautiful and historic city of Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
That's all there is to say.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to comment about Katie, the girl who began hating piano.
Mm-hmm.
And that, you have to imagine, what if she didn't have that experience with you? What would she carry into her adulthood? Mm. And so what teachers of children do when they instill this love of music through being successful, that's got to be a part of it. But it impacts society, because that becomes an adult in our world who could have taken that hate, for lack of a better word, with them towards something that is so beautiful and enriching.
Oh yes, absolutely.
It's a wonderful thing about what we do when we work with children.
Oh, it's a very, very precious thing we do have, and I remember I've heard plenty of bad stories about the teachers.
Right.
It used to be, with the ruler and all the rest
Yeah.
of it. I also tell my graduating students at Temple and other places I've taught. It's funny how so many of them will wait till the last piano lesson. They'll say, "Well, gee, Dr. B, after I get my degree, what should I do?"
Yeah.
It's kind of, I always tell them, I think we
question.
should have had that conversation a little while ago, whatever. But it's a conversation that sometimes you can tell them specifically what you think is a good idea, but often you really can't, or you don't want to for whatever reason or whatever. But one thing I have gotten in the habit of saying is, I'm not really able to say concretely what it is you should do, and unfortunately that's something you're going to have to figure out on your own. However, let me posit it to you this way. Because mostly they're speaking out of fear of financial issues,
Sure.
how they're going to support themselves and move forward. And so I'll say to them, you're a bright person, you've got a degree in music, you want to go get a degree in something else. I'm sure you're able to do that. Look at the world around you. Do we truly need, is there a lack of lawyers, dental hygienists, accountants, shopkeepers, blah, 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 as a sort of good analyst? I say, imagine if all those people doing those things who are doing it just for the money, what if they were poets? What if they were painters? What if they were skateboarders? What if they were aerialists? What if they were professional jacks players? What if they were, what if they were violinists, etc.? How beautiful would this world be if it was just totally full of creative people enjoying their creativity? And I say to them, find a way to keep your creativity. That's one of the most important things you can do. I think in my own life, when I came to that difficult point in my own life where money was very hard, I was very nearly homeless. There was some little nugget in my head that always said, don't do something that's not in music. Always be in music. And I did an awful lot of things in music. I played for weddings. I played for funerals. I played for bar mitzvahs. I played for an auction house once. Let's see, I played for a Greek wedding in a lawn on Long Island once. I played bar music. I played circus music once. I played in a jail once for some prisoners. I've done a lot of that stuff. Taught kids, taught adults. I have not taught animals yet, but maybe that's where the pigs come in.
That could be.
You never know. That's a whole nother field of endeavor.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, and what strikes me about that is, although you were doing all those different things that, it's not the concert stage, they all had an element of being true to yourself in terms of the connection to music. Mm-hmm. And after transitioning, how can you do something else that's not true? Mm-hmm. So I will, this is sort of my own personal reaction to your splendid performance last night, that for me, I was looking at it as this is fabulous music, and it's played so genuinely, and that can only come from somebody who is fully integrated and knows themselves. It was very powerful.
Oh my goodness! Thank you so much. I think that always came to me very naturally because my teachers were all like that.
Yeah.
I mean, Frikushny was in a way in my mind the total exemplar of that, and the European role models that I looked to were Clara Haskell and Dino Lipatti. I mean, and Busoni himself. I had the pleasure to play for several of his pupils as well, and these people, yes, they were at one with their music. They were their music. The music was them. Yeah. And it's very, very important to me. I'm always kind of nonplussed by people who can play a recital, but then it doesn't seem to mean a whole lot to them.
Yeah.
There are, of course, such people. I mean, but in my later days before transition, I recall anger and frustration going to faculty meetings at Manhattan School and sitting at a table of people, and I thought, I'm sitting here with a mask on my face, and I'm preparing to take it off, but I think these people are got a mask on their face, and they're never going to take it off. Mm-hmm. And there are people who go through life, without removing that mask.
There's one thing I wanted to explore a little bit with you, and that is the issue of identity and identifying as a transgender woman. Well, I think I know a lot of these answers myself as I ask the question, but I mean, ideally, we wouldn't need to say things. It would just be who we are and so forth, and it isn't an issue. But that's not the case with today's society. So I'm wondering if you could answer the question that sometimes I know I have heard people say: Why is it important for us to know about you?
It's a very, very fair question, but I think it's important. Why is it important to know anything about anyone? In a sense, I mean, we have an incredible democracy. It's a multicultural democracy, and again, I guess I refer to that experience of language and diversity and how much it's enriched my own life. Originally, I guess I decided I would, transition very, very openly because I had to. I didn't really have any option. I figured, it's funny. I had a friend at the time who said, "I think you'll need to leave the country." And he says, "I think maybe if you go to Romania, you can find a job or something like that." I thought, what kind of? Another person said to me, "Well, naturally, you'll be leaving New York and starting a new life elsewhere." And I thought, no, I mean, why would I do that? Mm-hmm. The issues facing transgender people are perhaps unique, and I think if you look at the politics and news of our time, mostly completely misunderstood. Mm-hmm. Right. And I think in that aspect, it's very important when I go on the concert stage that, in an ideal world, I'd just like to go on stage and play the music and nobody cares. Yeah. But I'm well aware when I'm playing, those concerts, after the concert, GLBT folks come backstage and they say, you're a role model, you're an inspiration, et cetera, et cetera. And I try to be modest about that. No, I didn't, ask for that description of my life, but I realized that because I'm a public person, I'm in a place to make an impression and represent something to people. Lord knows we have a very, very long way to go in this country about a lot of things. Yeah. I have to say that I had witnessed the race riots in Baltimore as a kid in the year 1968, and to see those replay in the city of Philadelphia 50 years later was so depressing. I thought of Badura Scotta's understanding of that situation. I thought, how many Americans don't have any clue what it's like to grow up in an African American slum where there's no future, where there is no hope. You know?
And that there's a parallel there in terms of Black artists performing and how that changes perception for Black children.
Oh, very, very
to
much
see.
so.
And I know for a fact that your appearances impact people with transgender relatives and who have spoken to me and said, you know, I feel seen. I thank you, you know.
Yes.
So I extend their thanks to you.
Oh, it's very sweet of you. Thank you.
It's really quite important. And as I said, you know, just to witness the wholeness of an individual, and creating such magnificent music, it's a wonderful thing that you give our world. We're running near the end of our time, so I need to ask you the question we're asking all of our interviewees on this series.
Well, the answer is blue. My favorite color is blue, right? Okay.
That won't work, because the question is, how does piano inspire you?
Piano inspires me the same way that birds inspire me, the same way that pigs inspire me, the same way that snow inspires me, the way that a blue sky on an autumn day inspires me. It is the color, the spark, the magic in my life every day. To touch that magic box, it's a connection with my childhood. It's lifelong. And I just hope that when I die, maybe there really is a big heaven in the sky, and when I get there, it'll say, the bar's open, and can you play as time goes by? Because it's my favorite tune.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Sara, so much for spending this time with us. Thank you for all you do in your career, and for your bravery in your personal life, and sharing that with us.
You're so kind. Thank you, Craig. Honor and pleasure to be here. Thanks.
You're welcome.
The Francis Clark Center is a not-for-profit educational organization that serves the advancement of piano teaching, learning, and performing. Divisions include Piano Magazine, PianoInspires Kids, Journal for Piano Research, National Conference on Keyboard Pedagogy, the New School for Music Study, Piano Education Press, International Online Teacher Education, and PianoInspires Online Community Hub. Please visit us at pianoinspires.com to learn more about our impactful work and inspiring community.